Episode 5, Discovery and Renegotiation. Let me tell you something before we go on. I did not have any grand plan. I just had to keep the work moving and keep my eyes open. Because the minute you start trusting too easy, somebody decides you are theirs to manage. After a while, the work found a rhythm that almost looked like routine from the outside. Cass would come after dark, with his headlights dimmed and his engine cut early, rolling the last stretch toward the barn in that practiced quiet that told you he had been doing this longer than I had been riding horses. He lifted crates without flourish or strain. He counted jars under his breath, and he never stood still long enough for a neighbor's eye to get curious. I stood near the lantern and watched, because watching is part of surviving when you have put your life into somebody else's hands. By then, I had stopped measuring time by calendar days. I measured it by barrel cycles, by how long the mash needed to turn, by when the foam settled and the smell sharpened, by the moment a lid felt warm from what was working underneath. 2 big barrels rotated like patient animals tethered in shade, one fermenting while the other cooled from a run. The smaller cask filled the gaps between them, a way of keeping the work from stalling when weather or fatigue tried to slow me down. The barn always smelled of tobacco, grain, damp wood, and faint heat, even on mornings when no fire burned. My shoulders relaxed. My hands didn't shake as I assembled the copper. The still answered me with drip and hiss, and I learned its language, the way you learn a horse's mood by the set of his ears. A change in scent, a shift in the sound of boiling, condensation beating where it did not belong, small warnings that meant something if you paid attention. Money came back in regular intervals, a steady stream that filled Mama's drawer. I marked progress against the remaining balance like a woman keeping score of a man's game, watching for signs and measuring what men thought women didn't see. Some evenings I would spread the bills on the table and stack them by denomination, not because I needed to admire them, but because I needed proof that the final amount was shrinking. The number had shrunk enough to feel tangible, though not yet comfortable. The payment carried weight beyond its value because it shortened the distance I had already risked, and because it reminded me how much would be lost if I missed the mark. It was a morning trip into town for sugar and jar lids when I felt the first crack in what I thought I understood. I went into the general store with my face arranged the way it always had to be arranged in public. The air inside held coffee and tobacco and dry goods scents, the shelves stacked tight in narrow aisles, cloth bolts standing tall, and feed sacks slumped against the wall. Behind the counter, a fan turned slow, pushing warm air in circles that did nothing for the heat, but made a steady sound. Men stood near the counter talking, their voices rising and falling like a rain shower. Somebody laughed once, quick and sharp, then it went quiet again. I had nearly passed them when I heard my own work described in a way that made me slow down and listen. One man said that Chapel Hill shine is costing more than it did last month. Another added that price was worth it because you knew what you were getting. I kept my back to them and let my hand rest on a bag of sugar. I listened the way you listen when you cannot afford to be caught listening. Eyes on labels, body turned casual, heart working harder than your face will admit. A third voice asked what Cass Walker was charging now, and somebody said 10, maybe $11 a gallon if you did not argue back at him. They spoke the number like it was ordinary, like it belonged in the same category as feed prices and seed corn. That number landed hard, not because I could not do math, but because I had already done it so many times my mind ran it without my thinking. I was getting 7. 7 had sounded like a path when I had nothing else. Now it sounded like a hand in my pocket that was not mine. I finished my purchase and didn't waste time. Although I started to feel anger and wanted to say something, I didn't. I paid with the same calm I always used at a counter and stepped back into the sunlight and let the door swing shut behind me with that soft clap double doors make. Outside, a faint dust shimmered in the road, and summer heat pressed down like a calloused palm. I stood there long enough to let the information settle into my bones without turning into a scene, because scenes in town travel faster than truth. I had accepted $7 because I did not know better and wasn't greedy, Or maybe I had imagined Cass was helping me, and I refused to look straight at it as a strict money-making plan. Backlash waited at the hitching post, his head low and patient. I put my hand on his neck and felt the warmth of him relax my thoughts. I knew it would have been foolish to storm into a confrontation based on overheard talk alone. Men exaggerate. Stories grow legs and run off on their own. I told myself I would confirm this before I acted. I knew anger makes you sloppy, and sloppy gets you hurt. Still, all the way home I kept seeing those numbers. 10, 11, riding beside me like a shadow that did not care how cloudy the day was. I also knew something else. I could have pushed higher from the start, especially if that talk proved true. I knew I agreed, but I also wanted to make it pay better for me if it did for him too. Later, when Cass came for pickup, I watched him closer, not just his hands, but his ease, the way he moved calmly and casually. He loaded jars into crates with the same quiet efficiency and shut his trunk with that firm push of his hands. Out of the blue, he said demand was holding, like he was making conversation, and I told him I had heard that too. I kept my voice level and my posture loose, because the quickest way to lose a negotiation is to look desperate for it. He looked at me, and I knew he caught my tone, so he asked what I had heard. I told him folks were paying more, $10, maybe $11 a gallon. I did not dress the words up or soften them because I felt something. I let them sit in the barn, air the way smoke sits, before it finds a crack to escape. The lantern light caught the side of his face, and I saw the faintest tightening at the corner of his mouth before he smoothed it away, and he looked at me. Prices move, he said. Supply was tight. Folks wanted what they trusted. I said they trusted my corn, and he agreed. His response sounded more like we were agreeing about weather instead of money. I let the silence stretch because I was not sure what I was doing. The barn still held the smell of cooling copper and damp earth, and somewhere outside a lonely cricket chirped steadily. My hands stayed still at my sides, so he would not see them clenching to stop them shaking. Then I asked him if he really was charging more, and he did not deny it. He did not laugh like I expected him to. He looked at me the way a man looks at a ledger whose numbers have shifted. He wasn't insulted or ashamed. He said the market allowed it. He said that endorsement carried weight, and that is how it works. Up until then, I had treated that chemist's statement like forgiveness from a horrible sin. Hearing him name it as leverage changed my understanding, because it meant my goal so far away now. Certainty was a currency, and he had been spending it. So I told him, calm as I could, that if he was charging more, then so was I. I did not say it like a threat. I said it like a correction, the kind you make when a horse drifts too close to a ditch and you bring him back with the reins, firm and quiet. He studied my face like he was recalculating an arrangement he believed settled. He reminded me we agreed to $7 a gallon, and his voice carried that tone men use when they expect the old order to keep holding just because it has held so far. I told him 7 was before folks knew what they were buying. I told him if they were paying 10 or 11 now, I was not staying at 7, because I was the one tending barrels and banking fires and watching every drop come through the coil. The lantern flame wavered when a draft moved through the barn. Light shifted across the copper coil and threw long shadows against the wall. Cass rested one hand on the nearest crate and tapped his fingers once, thinking, and I watched that hand because it told me more than his eyes did. He asked if I wanted $7.50, like he was offering a kindness. I knew what 50 cents would mean to him, and I knew what it would mean to me. Taking the first number offered is how people stay poor while someone else stays comfortable. I told him I wanted 8, flat. I had already run the numbers. 8 would not erase his margin, but it would narrow it. It would move my deadline closer without turning him into an enemy. I did not need to squeeze him dry. I needed balance. I needed the distance to shrink faster without making a fight out of every pickup, because fights draw eyes, and eyes bring law. Cass breathed out through his nose, a sound that might have been amusement or acknowledgement. He said 8 cut close. I told him not as close as 7, and I kept my face steady when I said it, even though inside I could feel the tremor of risk. That is the part people never believe later. There was no shouting, no raised voices, no threats. It was just two people doing arithmetic out loud, steady and plain, each of us weighing risk in the same lantern light. He weighed the risk of losing a reliable supply against the profit of holding firm. I weighed the risk of alienating my distributor against the certainty of being underpaid. Finally, he said 8, but he wanted clean pickup, no missed nights. He wanted the kind of regularity that lets a man build his own reputation on someone else's work. I told him clean, and I meant it, because my word was all I had in that barn besides copper and fire. He held his hand out, and I took it. The shake was firm and brief, not ceremonial, binding enough to matter, and cold enough to remind me it was not friendship. When he drove away, I stood alone in the barn and listened to the quiet return. The lantern burned lower as the oil thinned. The copper lay disassembled on the plank, cooling, and the barrels waited in their cycles like they did not care about any bargain except the one between yeast and time. $8 a gallon would move that number faster, but it would also demand steadiness. There was no room for complacency now, not from him and not from me, because once you show you will speak up, people watch to see if you will do it again. In town, Cass started speaking about my liquor with measured emphasis, using that Chapel Hill line as a true endorsement. He never named me as the maker. He thought if people knew a girl was cooking liquor, the scandal would be too big. The price held at 10 and sometimes 11 when buyers were in a bad way. He did not try to widen his profit margin. He respected profit too much to abandon our understanding. He respected me too much then to test whether I was watching, and I understood that respect was not tenderness. It was a calculation shaped into manners, something I had heard, and something I began believe as the truth. At home, I recalculated the remaining balance with the new rate folded in. I did it in my head as I stirred a pot of mash, while I carried water from the branch, while I lay in bed staring into the dark. The figure shrank quicker, though not so quick I could relax. There was still the posted date, still the clerk's handwriting on a receipt, still that truth my father had said without lifting his voice, that partial money disappears as easy as full money if you do not finish. Daddy noticed the steady rhythm of pickups and the regular return of money without commenting directly. Mama folded bills into stacks with hands that trembled, only from fatigue and not from doubt, and sometimes she would pause with a bill between her fingers, like she was feeling the edge of what we had become. I grew more confident each day. My movements around the still grew more fluid, less tentative. I had stepped into negotiation without raising my voice, and the world had not collapsed. It had adjusted, the way land adjusts when water cuts a new line, and everything has to learn a new boundary. That knowledge gave me a new kind of steadiness, not pride, not swagger, just the understanding that I could name what I needed and not be swallowed for it. Outside, the sycamore kept shedding bark in pale curls. The land did not reward me, it did not punish me, it simply held its shape, waiting to see whether I would hold mine.